Okay, brilliant. Thank you everybody for joining us today. I'll just let you know that we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for you to watch again, probably in about 24 hours. Just check out the website and it will all be on there. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. With us today, we have got Caitlin Wilkinson, Policy Manager, and Alicia Kennedy, the Director of Generation Rent. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited for this webinar. I'm going to switch off my camera now and my microphone and hand over to you if you want to share your screen. Please do make use of the chat box, everybody, and also the Q&A function. And yeah, if you need anything at all, give me a shout.
Okay, thank you. Hi guys, thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation. Good to speak to you today. My name's Alicia. I'm the Director of Generation Rent, and I've got my colleague Caitlin here with me, who's the Policy Manager. We're going to speak to you briefly for about 5 or 10 minutes and then open it up for ideas and questions and comments about students and renting. First of all, I'll just give you a little bit of background to Generation Rent. We're the national voice for those who rent in the private sector from landlords and letting agents. We develop policy with and for private renters. We campaign to ensure the voice of renters are heard by policymakers and politicians. And we lobby for change in the law to make sure that houses in the private rented sector are safe, they're more secure, they're better quality, and they're more affordable. And as you all know, as students and as a former student myself, the private rented sector is packed full of students. In total, there are estimates that around 30% of the private rented sector are student households. So that's why we're delighted to be invited to be part of this event today and have a chance to talk to you about your rights and your experiences and gather your ideas and experiences about the rights you do not yet have. But as Generation Rent, we can campaign and work with you to give you those rights and fill those gaps in legislation and policy that will make renting much more secure, safer, better quality and more affordable for students. Now, the pandemic, as you all know, has raised many issues for students. Those that have returned home to returned back to the family home are worried about the rent for accommodation they're not living in. Some universities and landlords have reduced the rent and cancelled rents, which is welcome, but some haven't. Student loans, while they're continuing, because students may have been furloughed or lost their part-time jobs or been able to go out due to social distancing, rents are high and rent debt for students is creeping up. And we want to campaign with you on these issues. But even before the pandemic, you will know, and we know from our work with students across the country, that there were issues with student renting even before the pandemic. Issues of affordability, issues that you should get advice before you sign a tenancy, but many of you don't. Too common are the complaints about landlords being unresponsive to fixing repairs. When I was a student at Warwick University and we lived in Leamington, I had no idea of our rights. We signed a contract without any advice whatsoever. There wasn't any serious issues, thankfully, but our landlord did used to come in, let himself in on a regular basis to see if the house was tidy. Little did we know that he had absolutely no right to do that he had to give notice and he had to get permission before entering the building, but we had no idea. But whatever your problems, Generation Rent wants to work with you, campaign with you, and get your ideas and ensure that students across the country understand their rights. And that's the first bit of the session today. And I'm going to pass over to Caitlin to go through the rights for students that do exist and the responsibilities. And at the end, I will come back and see how we can work together to campaign for the rights you do not yet have. Caitlin.
Thanks, Alicia. Thank you very much for having us here today. Yeah, as Alicia said, firstly, we want to briefly go through the rights that students do have as tenants. Obviously, renters in the UK have some of the poorest security in Europe and pay more of their income on rent than any other group. But that said, it's really important that student renters know the rights that they do have and that these are properly enforced. Before I just start talking, I'm keen to do a poll, if I can work out how to on Zoom, basically to find out, okay, so there should be a poll up. I want to find out what the biggest issue that your students have facing renting. I have said the biggest, but you can pick more than one, I think. I don't know if you can actually, but please pick the one that's the biggest issue. And if there's something that we haven't covered, please do write it in the chat, because I'm keen to make sure that that the information we're giving is actually relevant to what people are experiencing, both pre-pandemic and now. I think, as Alicia said, so many students are renting for the first time. Many aren't aware of the limited rights that they do have, and it makes some landlords and letting agents take advantage. But the advantage that student renters have is that as they're part of a university, hopefully part of a student union, and have access to student union staff and student officers, it's much easier to organise against the landlords and letting agents that are breaking the law or exploiting student renters. And that's why it's so important to know the basic rights that you do have. I'm going to look in the poll. I'm going to leave it running for a bit. As you can see that high rents is currently winning, along with quality and availability of property. I'm just going to go over some of the areas that we hear most often from students at Generation Rent. Basically issues with contracts and with finding a house in the first place, issues with repairs once you're actually in the house, and then we often get questions about deposits and how to actually leave a tenancy as well. And I think the first thing to stress is that while students have specific needs, they have exactly the same rights as other tenants in the private rented sector. You will all likely know this, but I think it's an important point to make, because you so often hear about student landlords or student letting agents, and I think there's quite a few students who aren't actually even aware that a student tenancy is exactly the same as a non-student tenancy in many cases, and that they have the same rights as everyone else. And I should say that we are mainly speaking here about the about students in the private rented sector rather than of university owned accommodation. But if you have questions or concerns about that, please do put them in the chat and we will try and answer them in a Q&A at the end. I think the first thing that it's important to state for all students when finding a house is that we know upfront costs involved can be a massive burden to student renters. It's unfortunately standard practice to ask for rent and deposit in advance up front, which can be very difficult for students. But one thing it's important that all students are aware of is that letting agents are no longer allowed to charge fees. Generation Rent were one of the groups that campaigned to change the law on this. So if you do come across student letting agencies charging fees, you can report them to a council, to a trade body, to us, or you could even collect them yourselves as a student union and make sure that those that are still doing it are named and shamed. And if you're a student renter, we also hear of some student renters moving in places without seeing the contract. It's really important to never do this and understand that even though tenancy rights are quite limited in this country, your landlord can't ask you to leave without giving 2 months notice in the contract, and they can't ask people to leave in the first 4 months after signing, and they also usually can't put the rent up in this time. We've heard some horrible stories particularly during the pandemic, of landlords asking people to leave or changing the locks. Like, this is illegal and it needs to stop happening. And then the second thing we most commonly hear, which is the second biggest issue in the poll at the minute, is poor quality and repairs during the tenancy. I feel like in the UK it's almost seen as a rite of passage for student houses to basically be awful. But my 3 student houses were all damp, all had, various problems. Luckily, nothing particularly serious, but students shouldn't have to put up with substandard or dangerous conditions, and poor quality housing can put a massive strain on your mental or even physical health. And I think it's really important that student unions play a role in holding student landlords to the same obligations to keep houses in good condition that all landlords have. And this covers things like mold and damp. It may come as a surprise that landlords have to keep properties fit for human habitation, but they do. They also need to keep everything in working order and carry out most repairs and make sure that the property is safe, as gas and electrical safety certificates are in place. And if the landlords aren't doing repairs, all students should make formal requests to keep records. Again, if a student landlord isn't doing these things, that's where student unions can play a really important role in holding them to account. And so if your landlord isn't doing repairs, you can report them to the council. And in the most serious cases, student renters can take their landlord to court and even get money back by a rent repayment order. And that's if things like that includes things like if the landlord hasn't got a proper electrical or gas safety certificate, if they haven't protected your deposit properly, or if they've done, there's a wide range of things that mean you can actually get your rent back. And the third thing that I wanted to cover just briefly is that students also often report having issues when leaving a tenancy. This has been a huge issue regarding coronavirus in particular, as many students have been locked into contract, even though, you know, the university's closed. Many of them have gone home. Often some housemates have left and left the others with the rest of the tenancy. Often, like, people, we've heard of landlords taking things out of the deposit. And I wanted to cover deposits here today, because they're designed obviously to cover any damage or loss at the end of the tenancy, but we know that many student landlords take advantage to make huge and unfair deductions, often for spurious and unreasonable reasons. I can definitely think about my own experience of times where you've been charged for something that was there when you moved in, or that just is not, you know, getting charged £200 for a bit of dust or something like that. And again, I think this is something that students get particularly hit by because there's a high turnover, and I think often landlords will know that the dispute process can be quite long and quite time consuming, but that, like as with other areas of the PRS, they do have to follow due process. They have to make deductions. They have in a reasonable way in accordance with how the deposit is protected. All deposits have to be protected in an accredited scheme within 10 days. And if they're not, that's one of the ways you can get your rent back. And they can't just randomly take money away from students. They have to follow the correct dispute process. Generation Rent's actually campaigning for deposit passports, which would mean that tenants don't have to pay up front each time that they move. They can move a deposit between houses, which would be a huge help to plenty of students who we know struggle with the upfront costs. And so there are many, I feel like I could go on for a very long time about all the different areas of the PRS that students have issues with, but I'd much rather hear from you guys about what you think the most common issues are and what you are keen to do about it. If you have any questions, please do drop them in the Q&A in the chat, and we will have questions at the end. But at first, I think Alicia is going to outline some of the ways that we can work together to improve this, and that's both through practical help, the information and support you can give your students, and through campaigning to strengthen the law. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Caitlin. I'm just going to try and share my screen, and hopefully the host from the Coventry University will allow me to do that. So we just need to give that a minute while she swaps us over. Yeah, okay. Here we go. I just wanted to set out for you guys that actually, as Generation Rent, though we're a campaign organisation, we're very keen that all students are aware of their rights. And so we can provide a set of services for universities and student unions around the country. So I wanted to just set out support for you, and then actually how you could help support us better in the campaign and policy development work that we do. So you'll see on your screens that, you know, because the focus is ensuring that every student is completely aware of the rights that they currently have and how they should be enforced. We would provide information at your Freshers' Fair, should they carry on or continue in September, or just do general advice sessions for groups of students hosted by the student union or the university, provide checklists, provide you with information that you can share with students in your student unions to set out exactly what rights they should look at, what pitfalls they should look out for. We would also help to develop student union housing accreditation schemes. These are becoming more popular. Universities, some universities around the country do have them, but we see increasing number of student unions who are moving towards replacing university accreditation schemes with student union housing accreditation schemes. Now, most notably, the one that I saw recently was Lincoln University, and they offer a student-centred approach, a peer-to-peer approach. It's independent and it accredits landlords within the local area, and they work with the university and the advice support staff in the student union and the university to deliver this service for students. In Lincoln's case, this will start, I understand, in September, but these schemes generally work with landlords to ensure that student accommodation and students have access to safe and good quality properties. They encourage and work with students to have good communications with their landlords, both before they sign the tenancy agreement and throughout the tenancy agreement. And they work, as I said, in partnership with the universities and advice centres. And we believe these are excellent schemes and can work well as students learn from students. Students are at the heart of the policies and processes, and they can learn from each other and share experience. And the independence works well in terms of keeping the landlords accountable. So that's some ways that we can support you in your efforts to ensure all students know their rights. Then how can you help us to help you? As Caitlin and I have said, students do have rights as members, people within the private rented sector have rights. However, we know there are gaps. We know there are experiences which show that there are policies that are deficient, that regulation is deficient. So we need to hear the voice of students within that debate, and we can help amplify the voice of students in that debate at a national level. So we have a site called Vent Your Rent, which is the URL is on the screen, ventyour.rent, and that's a place where you can go and your students can go and you can go to share the real life experience of students and how they are not getting the rights they receive, or those rights aren't being enforced properly at a local level, or indeed they're experiencing something where the right doesn't even exist. And we will develop the policy at a national level and campaign on a national level to fill those gaps and ensure they're enforced as they should be. Some university student unions around the country have actually expressed an interest in setting up a Generation Rent Club or a club of students for the private rented sector, just like you might have a human rights campaign club to campaign for renters' rights. We're very keen to work with student unions who may be interested in that. And obviously we want to work with you to campaign when we do spot a gap, where you do tell us of something that needs to be changed, where we are campaigning currently for the government to act to protect renters from evictions from the 23rd of August. You will know that the evictions ban, the government did put a stop on evictions, but that ban has since been lifted. After this, there are no legal protections for renters who have significant rent arrears due to COVID-19. Our campaign is currently trying to get the government to stick to the promise they said, that no renter should lose their home due to COVID-19. And you can help us amplify those campaigns online, with social media, and tell us again through Vent Your Rent if you find that students are being evicted now or having notices served from them, because we want to make sure that when Parliament returns in September, the policymakers and politicians hear clearly the impact that this lifting the eviction ban has had on some people in the private rented sector. So we can support you with information, we can help you develop independent schemes, and you can help us by telling us what needs to happen, how it's being enforced on a local level, and help us campaign to put it right. I'll now open to questions. I'll leave this screen on so that you've got our contact details, and we'll now move to questions. I've just got a question here from Anonymous, and it's about the tenants fee. Does the fee include admin fees, or can the landlord or landlady still charge for this? And I'm going to ask Caitlin to reply to that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So in a word, no. So as of the 1st of June 2020, it's actually easier to say what your landlord or landlady can charge you for, because the vast majority of fees are now banned. The only thing they can charge you for is obviously your rent, a security deposit, a holding deposit. If you want to end the tenancy early or change the tenancy agreement, they can charge limited fees for this. Or if you have lost something like a key, then they can charge you for this. But things like those kind of anonymous, vague sounding admin fees are absolutely not legal. So if this is happening to you or the students you represent, if you hear of letting agents breaking this, then you need to report them, because it's really important that the ban is enforced. What you can do, you can contact your local council's trading standards team. You can also contact the letting agents. They have to be members of an industry redress scheme. I think as student union officers and staff and student officers, you could just start a list of letting agents that are breaking the law in your area to kind of name and shame them and deter other students and from letting from them. I'm aware that that was quite a lot of information. It is all on Generation Rent's website, exactly what they are allowed to charge and what you should do if you find an agent breaking the law. But yeah, no, admin fees are gone.
Yeah, and that leads to this next question that we've got. So if landlords are not following all laws and policies that are taking advantage of students, which is the best way to report this, especially when they're about to move out at the end of the academic year? As Caitlin said, you know, that is what we're all about. You know, there are some student unions around the country that do have schemes, accreditation schemes, so that you would therefore be able to report landlords who are taking advantage of students, and therefore advise students in the future to therefore not participate or enter into a tenancy agreement with that landlord unless they had certain assurances in place. You can tell us about it, you can, because we want to hear those experiences, as I said, to ensure that we understand the impact of policies and regulations on students and how enforcement and landlords aren't operating within the law, so we can amplify that voice. So having a system within your student union to not only keep a check on landlords, please do let us know about it, because we can then amplify that at a national level. I don't know if Caitlin, you've got anything to add on that while I look for the next question.
No, I would just emphasise that like student unions are a really important place where you can hold landlords to account and use the fact that students are part of a wider group. You can also report them and let you know, publicise it. Tell whoever you can, tell your local paper that you're going to report them. Make sure that you've got, yeah, there's many ways that you can just make sure that if they are breaking the law, they are held to account.
There's another question here about can university accommodation evict students, for example, smoking, where you couldn't do that in the PRS? Is that right? I'm going to pass to Caitlin, but my initial reaction would be, I'm sure that if it's a university run accommodation, the university would have rules and regulations over and above the law, if you like, and I suspect that entering into that accommodation, you would have to have agreed to the terms and conditions. However, I'll just pass to Caitlin to see if that's a correct assumption for that.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a question that is for individual universities. I think if you feel that evictions are too high from accommodation that university owns and manages, then I think it's absolutely worth raising it with them. I feel like if you're smoking a joint as the question says, if you are, you know, smoking something that's illegal in the PRS, that is in breach of your tenancy contract, so you might be less, you know, that is an issue in the PRS as well. But I think, yeah, I think when it comes to things that are run from the university, you have to sign up to their terms and conditions, and if you want them changed, you should probably, yes, raise something with them, I'd say.
I've just had a little notice from the staff coordinator saying that if people want, they can unmute themselves and they can talk directly to us or type, as some people are in the question or chat box. But apparently you can unmute yourself, so please do.
Yeah, I didn't realise you could do that. Please do jump in.
But, the CUSU staff believe that you can, so let's give it a go, and if not, continue to type in the Q&A box. Now, Grace, yeah, someone's asking how we unmute, so I think if the staff could answer that, that would be very helpful. In the meantime, Grace has been working with the university around rent caps and price bands, but the university always saying students are choosing the highest price band as an excuse to have more expensive options. Any advice to counter this? I mean, you know, as if. Well, that would be my response to that. Caitlin.
Yeah, I've genuinely never heard of that argument before. I think the idea that students are choosing to the highest price band when we all know that in many cities the loans and grants you get from the government don't even cover the cost of rent. I find that very difficult to believe. I think you will have the best case studies from your university that will indicate that that's just not true, and I think you can use student voices to have a strong counter argument to that. I've actually never heard that one before, so yeah, I'm skeptical as well.
Yeah, Asha asks about quality accommodation. What's the flexibility about a student living in a bad house? Is there anything a student can do if they're in a toxic environment where they live and need to get out? Are landlords in a position where they can move them or assist them in this to ensure any individual's mental health doesn't suffer? A brilliant question, Asha. Caitlin, do you want to?
This is a really, really good question, and it's one that I don't have a totally satisfactory answer to, because I think this might be something that does need policy change. I think I think this is something that affects students a lot. I certainly know when I was a student, you have to choose your house. You have to choose your house very early on. You might not fully know who you're living with. You might be in a house with multiple occupants. And if you're with people who are damaging to your mental health or even physical health, the inflexibility of the contract you're in can be a massive problem. One thing I would say is to always sort of understand that if you're signing a joint contract with people, understand what that means, which is that you are all responsible for it. And because the contract, if you've signed a joint contract, it's very difficult for a landlord to move you out. There are obviously services you can contact if your mental health is suffering and you feel like there's an immediate threat to your mental or physical health. And if you're being harassed by people in your household, definitely contact your local advice service like Citizens Advice. There is also work in Parliament, I believe, to introduce some MPs are calling for more flexible contracts, so that if a student's in a situation where they're not getting on with their housemates and they're risking their health, they can move. And I think that's something that definitely needs more work, because the vast majority of students are on joint contracts, and this is one of the problems with them. So I'm sorry that in a way that was an unsatisfactory answer, but that's an example of where campaigning is really important to change the law.
And we've worked out how to unmute somebody. I think the host of the university unmutes everyone separately. So I'm going to ask Sophie to do that now, and that person can ask their question verbally. Joanna.
Hi, Joanna.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Fabulous. I asked the question about admin fees, and I just wanted to get a bit more clarification, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
I've been living in the same student house now, and it's going to be my third year. And as the first 2 years, I was charged an admin fee.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, is there anything that I'd be able to do, assuming obviously that was the 1st of June last year. Well, actually, no, from the 1st of June last year, I suppose I would have signed a new contract, actually. Is there anything that I would be able to do if I think my contract lasts until July, would I be able to do anything about the admin fee that I paid at the end of last year?
I'd have to check that, because so before June the 1st, 2020, so last month, fees were still permitted for tenancies that started before the 1st of June 2019. So did yours start before then?
I've now been in this house for so long that I can't quite.
Yeah, it's difficult to know, because also sometimes you stay in the same house but you sign a new tenancy agreement. So I'm not, and without knowing the specifics of exactly when you signed it, it's difficult to say for sure, but I can absolutely send you the latest guidance on it, because it may be that it depends on when you re-signed, which is...
No, that's perfect, thank you.
Cool. I hope good luck, I hope. Yeah, and if you leave, I think our contact details are on there, so yeah, we can follow.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, let us know, Joanna. And actually that leads to the next question. There clearly is issues still within the student community about letting agency fees, because the next question is, what's the best way to let students know about landlords and letting agencies who are taking advantage of students when student unions are concerned with being taken to court and the cost liable associated with that? I mean, I was a student union officer myself many years ago. I know you won't believe it, but it was about 30 years ago. You know, I was education and welfare officer, and I think I saw that somebody on here is the education and welfare officer for the student union. And you know, it is hard to get information across, and we can help you with that by providing resources so that you can have information available to all students, freshers fairs, run advice sessions, posters, awareness campaigns on campus. That's what I say about, you know, many university student unions are now setting up clubs for students that are private renters, so that there's a campaign around policy and information that you can lobby and work with the university better and more effectively. You know, and we're very keen, as I said, because students are such a huge part of the private rented sector, you know, to work with any student union or university who wants to work with us and is looking for an additional help or sharing best practice from around the country. But as I say, on our site, and if Caitlin can find it, we could post the link, but there is a way. If you let info@generationrent.org, let us know where you think that letting agents are passing on admin fees that they shouldn't to the students, and we have a system to report them to the proper regulator, and we have had success with that. So and of course you can do that yourself. Okay, and of course you could do that yourself, but because we have a system in place to do that, please let us know and we can do that. But I think in a student union situation, it's about information and about having a process within your student union where students can raise issues with the advice service or yourself, so you can spot gaps in regulation and policy, and then you can seek the help and support of an organisation like Generation Rent, who can help amplify them at a national level to get change. The next question: if a student flat has a fire and they can't stay there, is the accommodation in charge of finding another flat for them to stay in, or does it depend on the contracts? So obviously you're not talking about university accommodation here, because I would very much hope the university would have to find somewhere else for someone to live. But in the private rented sector, I'll just pass that to Caitlin, who will give advice hopefully on that.
I think, as I understand it, if the home isn't fit to live in, then that's a responsibility for your landlord to take action. In terms of what happens in the interim, I think it can depend on individual councils' policies, to the best of my knowledge. But we can send you the information on that one if you want to send us any more specifics, or if you just want to know in general. I can double check. I'm going to admit.
And just as an aside, having this session with you to ask these questions makes us more equipped to understand how we need to update our rights sheet, because these are the experiences that you've clearly had within your student unions and with your friends who are students, you know, so this is really helpful to us, so thank you.
Yeah.
And the next,
I just wanted to quickly go back to the question about like, how do you make sure students are aware of like dodgy agents? And I feel like there's some actually quite good ideas, like even in this chat, someone said like, do you collect the amount of evictions and reasons from each university? We love a league table. Like you could do that with the letting agents in your city or town. You could collect the number of problems you've reported. You could even organize things yourself, like you could show up to the worst agents and make a fuss. I think as students, well, at the moment it's harder to do things physically, but if that ever does change, like there's so much that you can do to encourage students to stay away from the dodgy agents. So yeah, be creative.
And the next question is about electrical appliances and alarms. This person says, I've lived in the same house for 3 years and have never known them to be checked. Now, again, there is new regulations that have come in and new legislation, thanks to the campaigning of Generation Rent and working with members of Parliament. And so Caitlin will definitely be able to give you an update here.
Yeah, so they should be checking them. There are now new responsibilities. Well, landlords have had to have annual gas safety checks, and that's for a few years. They now have to have annual electricity safety checks as well. If this is not happening, then absolutely check with your landlord and first out, find out, if they have checked them, ask to see the certificates, and if they can't, tell them, you can either complain to your local council, or you can just put pressure on your landlord to get them done. So yeah, they should be, in short.
Great. Is there, oh, sorry, I'm just like missed my place. Are there any campaigns or policies around private built student accommodation companies? Now, I don't know if you know Generation Rent, we're quite a small organisation, so our focus has been policies in regard to COVID-19 and evictions and the rent debt that students and other private rented sector has been putting together. So we ourselves currently do not have any campaigns around student accommodation companies. However, we are aware that there are many companies and property developers who are building accommodation that they are marketing to students who are inadequate in size, inadequate in facilities, are expensive for what they are and where they are. And we were just looking at how best to work with an institution on a trial basis to see within our capacity what could be done, and would that therefore then lead to legislation in the future of the level of facilities that should be included in a private student campus or student block within a city or a town. You know, should you have a certain size? Should you have a limit on the bathrooms? Should there be a minimum standard in terms of sharing facilities? So we don't yet have a specific campaign, but we know it's an issue. We want to look at it. And if anyone out there on this, anyone who can see this as a recording, or any of you guys listening, you know, are interested or know of terrible bad practice where students are effectively living in battery cages, you know, with no shared, with one kitchen between 30 or anything like that, then do let us know. I don't know if Caitlin, you've got anything to add on that.
Yeah, I would just encourage you all to let us know, and also emphasize that if there are certain conditions, certain developers or certain conditions that are in your cities that you're aware of, like I'd say that you guys are so well placed to sort of be active members in a campaign to get stricter regulations nationally. But yeah, we want to hear from you on those.
And this is, there's a lot of questions about how do we encourage students to talk about these issues. Absolutely. And I think that you know, these type of events that we could do with students in your institution and in your union, or as I say, we could come to the university or the union as to do freshers fairs or give advice sessions. I think once you put a program of activity together for students who are renting, maybe with the advice service that many universities and student unions have, then these issues will start coming to the fore, and you will therefore be able to see where your campaigning efforts should be more focused, as should ours. But we've done the league tables. Students often feel pressured to get the best accommodation, and therefore fall into contracts and situations which leave them with issues, and how best to avoid the effect of a panic buying from this occurring. Absolutely. But also, it's not just that. I mean, as I say, I know it's 30 years since I was a student, but it was just the dumb thing that in your second year of Warwick University, you went and lived in Leamington Spa, and so, the demand for students just going to live in Leamington Spa meant that their quality of accommodation was very poor. Landlords knew that we were all going to move out in the second year, and we wanted to live in Leamington, and that's because we were all our friends were there. That's where we wanted to be. So we created the demand in that area, which meant that landlords didn't have to pay that much attention to contracts, standards, didn't have to be as responsive to fixing repairs. So I think, as I said to the earlier question, having sessions, regular sessions with the university or in the union that sets out rights allows these conversations to come to the fore, so we can see where the gaps and the campaigns are. Caitlin, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, just that I think student unions can play a role in educating, especially people going into their second year, just that the importance of taking signing a contract seriously. I'm thinking from personal experience, but also from what renters have been telling us, like, signing a tenancy agreement is quite a significant legal contract with people, and I think there's a lot of people who just feel like they have to get this house now and there's not going to be any more later on in the year, and the letting agents contribute to that, as Alicia said, that, oh yeah, you've got to get this one, like this is the last house left in this area. And I think that earlier that there's proper information about good practice and things to check for before you sign any tenancy agreement and sign up to any house will kind of prevent some of those situations that leave people with issues.
Standards for halls of residence, are there any? I'd have to check, and we can check and let your guys know. I don't know if any of the student university staff on this call know. But what I do know is if they are, they're inadequate, because we do hear of and see students living in very small accommodation, as I said, without adequate facilities for common room or kitchen or toilets. And they clearly, so if there are regulations, they're inadequate. And, we would like to ensure that when legislation comes to Parliament that is relevant, that we can add more regulation through the planning system to ensure that you are not paying high rents for caged accommodation. And is Asha, and this is the final question actually so far, so if there's any more, type them away. Asha asks, is there anything a university student union can do when students go to a dodgy landlord who's private and is not approved by the university, and the students end up being unhappy and in bad conditions in the house? Caitlin, I think probably the answer to, as you said before, is probably not going to be a satisfactory answer, but there may be other things that they can achieve.
I think one of the biggest problems with the private rented sector is that it's up to local councils to take action against dodgy landlords who are letting out properties that are unsafe or covered in damp, or the stairs basically falling in, or in any way unfit to live in. And it's actually very difficult for people it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of knowledge for people to contact the council, and the council themselves often lack resources to enforce this properly. So I think one of the most important things a student union can do if students go to report a dodgy landlord is to kind of work with them to actually contact the council and bring action against that landlord, because it's laborious, it can take a long time, and I think a lot of landlords just know that students either won't bother or don't know how to. So I think it's all about making sure that the action is taken and that there's a support in place to make sure that people don't just get discouraged or give up, basically.
Yeah. You know, and either you yourself as student unions have a landlord accreditation scheme. So for future students, you're giving them increased protection, or encourage the university to do so if they don't already. Okay, so has anyone got any other questions or want to come through? No? Okay. Okay, well, in summary, can I just say a couple of things? The first thing is thank you very much for this invitation and for your questions. They've highlighted to us issues and that we need to ensure are covered in the right sessions that we do and the checklist that we provide. This is why it's so important for us to have a regular dialogue with students and student unions, because, as I said, 30% are in the private rented sector, which is huge as one cohort of individuals. And information is on the screen, so please follow us and sign up for our campaigns and information, and follow us on Facebook. We hope that you will get in contact with us so we can give you information on student rights to help you develop an accreditation scheme, or run an advice session, or give information to your students. And we hope that you will help us too by telling your students that they can tell us of their experiences, their personal stories, so we can amplify that at a national level and get involved in our campaigns. You know, social media can have a real impact, not least with a personal story, but even with a tweet to the right minister or the right MP or the right politician at the right time. So follow us on Twitter, share our information, and help us help you. And please do get in contact. We'd be happy to help and happy to get involved in your activities. Okay. Okay. I'm actually not sure what happens now, or whether a member of comes back in and says, thank you very much.
How to end a Zoom meeting.
I should just give it a minute.
I can certainly do that. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was really, really informative, and I think particularly welcome at the minute with the pandemic. I think everybody will have learned a lot from that, so thank you for your time. But yeah, that's everything. This recording will be available in about 24 hours on the conference website. So if you just check that out if you want to watch it again. But yeah, that's everything from us. So Alicia and Caitlin from Generation Rent, thank you so much. I will be hanging about if anybody has any general questions. And yeah, that's it. So thank you everybody for joining us. If you've got any final thoughts, please pop them in the Q&A or the chat. And thank you once again to Caitlin and Alicia. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having us. It was incredibly helpful for us as well.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right. I'll just see you. Thank you.